Good morning. My name is Matthew Bucket, and I'm a research fellow from the Cambodian Institute for Strategic Studies. Today I'm joined by Dr. Leonie Lethbridge, CEO of ANZ Royal. The topic of our interview today will be the World Economic Forum on ASEAN 2017, which will be hosted in Phnom Penh here in May. Thank you, Dr. Lethbridge, for taking your time today to do this interview.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure.
So I wanted to start off by asking you what you believe is the significance of Cambodia hosting the World Economic Forum on ASEAN this year.
Well, I think first up it's important to put ASEAN in context and then put Cambodia in context. ASEAN itself will be the fourth largest market in the world, currently the seventh. 600 million people, 10 countries, but rapidly growing and evolving. So in terms of the significance of Cambodia, I think it's important to address that in terms of the significance for WEF and the significance for Cambodia. So for WEF participants, I think it's important to think about ASEAN as a very fast-growing and evolving region. Cambodia is right at the heart of that region, particularly in terms of the continental ASEAN. And in some ways you could say it's at the crossroads of ASEAN, so that many of the discussions that are pertinent to ASEAN and the solutions that are pertinent to ASEAN are particularly pertinent to Cambodia. For Cambodia, I think it's significant in that it is recognition of Cambodia as a fast-growing, evolving economy, 15.6 million people. Not a huge economy, even in regional terms, but an important economy. It's important not only because there are things to learn from its pace of growth, sustained 7% over more than 2 decades on average, but also because the opportunities and challenges that are present in Cambodia are actually present in other regions as well. The other point of recognition, which I think, is that Cambodia is a very open foreign direct investment market, a very open regulatory regime. So it's a great place to actually address and consider some of the issues that are pertinent across the region, and almost to use Cambodia think of Cambodia as a sandpit or as a laboratory. So it's recognition of all of those things, I think. And as I said, that's significant for WEF, but it also has significance for Cambodia.
Great, thanks. And you touched on particularly youth and growth there. And the forum this year, it has the topic, or the theme, youth, technology and growth. What do you think of the significance of this choice of topics?
I think it's enormously significant. So ASEAN itself has the fastest growing internet population in the world. And so technology is, in the digital space, is clearly being taken up at an extremely fast rate. 99% of Cambodians, for instance, have Facebook accounts. But it's also, ASEAN is also clearly connected to a digital giant in the form of China, and those flows are also very important. And that capacity building that's coming in there is also, in from China, is also very important. So the technology piece is really pertinent in an e-commerce context. It's also really important in terms of harnessing the demographic dividend, or leveraging the demographic dividend that ASEAN poses. So if youth, technology and growth don't go together, then there's going to be a problem. They have to go together to generate sustainable growth on an ongoing basis, and sustainable inclusive growth.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about the digital revolution that we're undergoing, and do you think it has the potential to improve regional connectivity, and do you think that it can drive bottom-up integration across ASEAN that could challenge top-down prescriptions as well?
Well, I think technology should be used to provide solutions, and so whether that generates top-down, kind of a top-down, more homogeneous solution approach or not, I think is less relevant than whether it provides real solutions on the ground to emerging and current issues. So, I think there is huge opportunity to look at the issues, for instance, in agriculture all around ASEAN, whether it's Indonesia or whether it's Vietnam, and all points in between. Technology has a really pertinent place to play to improve agricultural productivity. And when I'm talking about technology, I mean in this case digital specifically. So it's got a really important place to play to solve some really fundamental bottom-up challenges and to present new opportunities as well. So, I'm thinking of aspects such as the use of drone technology to optimise fertiliser distribution, or to improve irrigation solutions, or even genetics as well, to really improve agricultural productivity. That's just one application. So I think the focus should be on providing solutions as opposed to a top-down integration, which is not really the ASEAN style.
Since 1999, the World Economic Forum has tried to shift to a more inclusive approach by focusing on inviting a more diverse group of stakeholders and aiming for policies that the World Economic founder Klaus Schwab termed as to have everybody in the boat. How can this approach benefit both ASEAN and the World Economic Forum?
Well, I think, as I said before, ASEAN itself has a population of 600 million people, and the demographics are extremely favourable, provided they're actually catered for. So it's important that WEF, I think, actually considers all stakeholder groups to get their perspective and to harness effectively the potential and the motivation of those 600 million people. Now, I mean, that's a tall order, but to at least consider the perspectives of those different groups is, I think, very important. One of the things that strikes me about being based in ASEAN, and that I've spent a long time in Indonesia, but also here, is this overwhelming sense of optimism and energy and eagerness for change, which is driving the kind of growth that we see across ASEAN. And so it's important that the power of the human spirit is actually leveraged to realise that change. On the other hand, if it doesn't, then I think we've seen there are plenty of case studies of the consequences of not being inclusive. And there's been some more obvious ones, and the rise of popularism, I guess, is a pretty clear consequence of it. So it's important for WEF that it can tap that potential and that aspiration. But it's also important that the aspiration is serviced and included.
And tying this back to you mentioning about the very large youth demographic in ASEAN, how do you believe that governments and businesses can further build trust so that the youth in ASEAN can have more confidence and belief in their future?
Well, I think that we spoke before about digital being really a game changer. So it's important that WEF is part of, and governments are part of, actually enabling access to that technology, building the education systems, including across the region, that actually allow people to access that technology, that equips them to be able to deal with it, leverage it, harness it, and create their own futures. There's a very strong entrepreneurial spirit in ASEAN, across ASEAN as a broad statement, and it's important that governments foster that entrepreneurial spirit, don't create excessive bureaucracy, but also enable that entrepreneurial spirit by, as I said, the education systems, the health systems, connectivity to actually allow economic access. Those kind of fundamental building blocks really need to be there. And it's a significant challenge to enable those fundamental building blocks. So government obviously has a key part to play in that enablement. but it can also assist with the policies that welcome direct investment, potentially foreign direct investment, and that also leverages global capital pools, whether they're philanthropic funds, whether they're investors, private sector investors, but it creates the right environment to enable those fundamental building blocks to be solved for. It's a big task when you've got such a rapidly growing population and a legacy of underdeveloped infrastructure across the region. So it's important that government solves for that, both physical infrastructure and also the human capital elements.
Yeah, those challenges definitely for ASEAN, but given the context of more broad global challenges like sluggish global demand, climate change, protectionism, and the European debt crisis, you also mentioned the rise of populism. What role do you foresee the World Economic Forum on ASEAN having in addressing these broad challenges?
Well, the challenges and opportunities, and we should think about both sides of that coin. The challenges and opportunities that are present here have to some degree been addressed in other places, or in other guises. I think of the way that China, for instance, has leveraged its demographic bulge, if you might call it that, and elevated people, hundreds of millions of people, more than 500 million people out of poverty, and created economic prosperity. The solutions that applied there can be considered for ASEAN, for instance. So that global perspective, I think, that WEF brings is actually very important for ASEAN. Secondly, WEF has some really interesting and great research. Gender, I think, is an opportunity for some of the gender work that WEF has done to apply in Cambodia. And that's, I guess, a point about inclusion alongside this point about youth as well. So I think WEF sees those global challenges, it's exposed to those global challenges, it's also exposed to those global solutions, and it can bring some of those global solutions to ASEAN.
Based on history and experience, how do you see the role of Cambodia in working with other countries within the framework of the World Economic Forum to address challenges?
Well, I think Cambodia is actually really adept and experienced at working with multilateral organisations. It's had a lot of experience in the last 20 years, in particular, at working with numerous agencies, including to address and solve really fundamental issues for Cambodia, but also to create opportunities. So, it has a strong track record there. Secondly, it has a track record in the context of ASEAN itself. And ASEAN by design is not a heavily integrated region, unlike, for instance, the Eurozone. So the processes are much more are very consensual, they're very dialogue-based. And so, again, Cambodia is adept at those kind of processes. I think that's actually an interesting approach for WEF to consider itself. We spoke before about WEF looking for an inclusive basis, and fundamentally ASEAN is about each nation within it striving for inclusion, almost on its to address its own concerns, issues, and opportunities. It's less a top-down bureaucratic approach and more a bottom-up inclusive approach, if you like. So I think the opportunity for Cambodia and for WEF is to actually demonstrate those kind of processes in action. Also, Cambodia is, as I said before, very good at attracting foreign direct investment, and so it's very good at working one-on-one. Cambodian entrepreneurs are very good at working with MNCs. ANZ Royal is a case in point. And lastly, I'd say that taking a prospective view, Cambodia itself has a relatively light regulatory framework. So the opportunities and challenges that WEF seeks to address can be deployed in Cambodia almost on a pilot basis. I think there's consideration being given to a blended finance solution where Cambodia is one of the countries, or actually the country that has signed up for that first. I think that's very appropriate because Cambodia has the need, and on the one hand, but on the other hand, has the regulatory context, as I said, a light touch regulation that allows it to leverage those opportunities. WEF can almost think about Cambodia as I said, as a sandpit. So I think both history and the future means that Cambodia is well positioned to collaborate with WEF.
So speaking of the future, what do you believe could be the outcomes of the forum this year in Phnom Penh?
Technology, so it's technology, youth and development. And those three aspects are really critical to be pulled together, to be aligned. Secondly, it's really important that they're considered to be urgent. They need to be considered in an urgent way because there are some really pressing problems arising, for instance, from climate change. So there was, the El Nino was very strong 2 years ago, but it probably isn't, more than 2 or 3 years away again. So those kind of really ecologically challenging problems need to have some solutions, and they need to have some solutions fairly quickly. So I hope that out of WEF there will be some big ideas distilled into some practical pilots, if you like. So there's some decisions around and some opportunities spotted to solve some of these fundamental and urgent challenges, but also some decisions about how some pilot solutions could at least be deployed.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think it's really it's easy to look at Cambodia and see it as an economy of 15.6 million people, or a nation of 15.6 million people, and not to give it the full consideration that it merits, both as a strategic crossroads in ASEAN and as a proxy in some ways for ASEAN. So I think it's terrific that WEF is coming to Cambodia, and I think the level of preparation that's already being undertaken is quite encouraging in terms of what the outcomes might be. So it would be great if those outcomes can be harnessed and some really good solutions put forward.
Thank you, Dr. Lethbridge, for taking your time out of your busy schedule for this interview.
No, thank you. It's been a great pleasure, and as I said, it's very encouraging that WEF's coming to Cambodia. So we're looking forward to it enormously.
Thanks. And thank you for staying tuned for this interview by Cambodian Institute for Strategic Studies.